Picture this. It's October 1907, and New York City is in chaos. Crowds of desperate men and women press against the iron gates of banks, shouting, demanding their money back. Police are called in just to control the surging mob. Inside the vaults, the cash reserves are vanishing. Panic spreads like wildfire. People whisper the word that terrifies everyone in that era: collapse. The stock market is spiraling. Brokerage houses are failing. Banks, once trusted pillars of society, are locking their doors without warning. Entire fortunes, built over decades, disappear in a matter of days. Ordinary families lose everything. And at the heart of it all is one undeniable truth. The United States has no central bank, no safety net, and no plan to stop the bleeding. In this storm of financial despair, one man emerges as the reluctant savior, an aging titan of Wall Street, J.P. Morgan. From the mahogany walls of his private library, Morgan calls the shots, deciding which banks live and which banks die. With a cigar in his hand and the nation's fate in the other, Morgan becomes, for a few weeks, the central bank America never had. The Panic of 1907 wasn't just another financial crisis. It was the breaking point, a moment so severe that it convinced lawmakers and financiers alike that the nation could no longer leave its economic future in the hands of luck, private bankers, or blind faith in self-correcting markets. This panic, born of fear and failure, would set in motion one of the most consequential creations in American history: the Federal Reserve. To understand the Panic of 1907, we first need to step back and look at the United States in the early 20th century. It was a nation on the rise, industrializing at lightning speed, brimming with ambition, wealth, and innovation. Railroads stitched the continent together, steel factories roared, and Wall Street became the beating heart of the economy. But beneath the surface, cracks ran deep. America had no central bank. It hadn't had one since the mid-1800s, when distrust of concentrated financial power killed the second bank of the United States. The nation prided itself on a free market system, but in practice, this meant financial markets were prone to wild booms and devastating busts. The banking system was especially fragile. Thousands of small local banks dotted the country, each with limited reserves. They were loosely connected to larger banks in New York, but there was no unified structure, no federal oversight, and no safety net for depositors. If people lost confidence in their bank, a run could wipe it out overnight. This fragility was compounded by speculation. Wealthy financiers made enormous bets on the stock market, and trust companies, new, lightly regulated financial firms, were becoming key players in high-risk investments. As long as the market was up, everyone profited. But when things turned sour, there was nothing to cushion the fall. By 1907, America's economy was already under stress. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906 had drained gold reserves as money poured westward for rebuilding. Interest rates climbed, and when a group of speculators launched a reckless plan to corner the stock of United Copper Company, they set off a chain reaction that would shake the financial system to its core. What followed was not just a crisis of money, but a crisis of trust. In the weeks that unfolded, the entire financial system came perilously close to collapse, until one man, J.P. Morgan, stepped in to hold the line. The story of 1907 is a story of fear, greed, and power, and the moment America realized it could no longer afford to gamble its future on the whims of the market. The spark that ignited the panic came from a single audacious gamble. In October 1907, two brothers, F. Augustus and Otto Heinze, attempted to corner the market on United Copper Company. The plan was simple in theory: drive up the price of copper shares, force short sellers to cover their bets, and make a fortune. But the gamble backfired spectacularly. Instead of skyrocketing, United Copper stock collapsed. The brothers lost everything. Worse, the failure exposed a web of connections between their firm and several trust companies, particularly the Knickerbocker Trust Company, one of the largest in New York. Investors panicked. If Knickerbocker was tied to such reckless speculation, could it be trusted with deposits? Within hours, rumors spread, and depositors rushed to withdraw their money. On October 22, 1907, thousands of anxious depositors lined the streets outside Knickerbocker's offices. They demanded their money, and Knickerbocker's president, Charles T. Barney, was forced to suspend operations. In one day, one of the largest financial institutions in New York collapsed. This event set off shockwaves. Other trust companies, sensing danger, saw their own depositors rush in. Banks began hoarding reserves, refusing to lend to one another. The entire financial system froze. As liquidity dried up, the New York Stock Exchange teetered on the edge of collapse. Stock prices plummeted. Brokerage firms, unable to secure loans, failed. The fear was contagious. Ordinary people began withdrawing from their local banks, further tightening the squeeze. It was at this point that J.P. Morgan entered the stage. At 70 years old, J.P. Morgan was the most powerful banker in America, a man with both immense wealth and immense influence. When the panic spread, government officials and bankers alike turned to him for help. From his private library on Madison Avenue, Morgan convened late-night meetings with the nation's leading bankers. With his trademark cigar clenched between his teeth, he assessed which institutions could be saved and which had to be allowed to fail. Morgan and his associates organized pools of money to prop up struggling banks, arranged emergency loans, and even ordered clerks to physically carry bags of cash to institutions on the brink. Most famously, when the New York Stock Exchange was hours away from shutting down entirely, Morgan corralled a group of bankers into his library and refused to let them leave until they pledged millions to keep the market open. It worked. The exchange survived. But the panic wasn't over. Trust companies remained in peril, and depositors' confidence was shattered. To restore stability, Morgan demanded they undergo audits and secure backing from stronger banks. Those that refused were left to fail. Morgan's role was not just financial, it was psychological. His very presence, his reputation as a man who could bend markets to his will, reassured many that order might yet be restored. By November, the immediate crisis began to ease. Morgan's interventions had stopped the worst of the collapse, but the panic had revealed an uncomfortable truth. The stability of the American financial system had depended on the judgment and willpower of a single, private individual. The panic of 1907 was not caused by one bad gamble alone. It was the inevitable result of deeper weaknesses in the financial system. 1. Lack of a central bank. Without a central authority to provide liquidity in times of crisis, the system was vulnerable to sudden shocks. In Europe, central banks like the Bank of England acted as lenders of last resort. In America, no such institution existed. 2. Fragile banking structure. Thousands of small, poorly capitalized banks were vulnerable to runs. The reliance on trust companies, lightly regulated but deeply tied to speculation, made things worse. 3. Public confidence. The crisis showed how quickly fear could unravel the system. Once depositors lost trust, even solvent institutions could collapse overnight. The consequences were profound. In the immediate term, the panic led to a severe recession. Businesses closed, unemployment rose, and credit remained tight. But the long-term consequence was more important: the recognition that reform was necessary. The Aldrich Commission, established in 1908, studied the crisis and recommended the creation of a central banking system. After years of debate, this led directly to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. The Panic of 1907, therefore, can be seen as the final push that convinced America to modernize its financial system. The Panic of 1907 feels distant, yet its lessons remain strikingly relevant. It showed that markets, left entirely to themselves, are not always self-correcting. Fear spreads faster than reason. Confidence can collapse in an instant. And without a stabilizing force, panic can bring down even the strongest institutions. It also highlighted the danger of concentrating too much power in the hands of a few. J.P. Morgan may have saved the system, but the fact that the fate of the U.S. economy rested on one man's shoulders was deeply unsettling. Americans asked, what if Morgan hadn't acted? What if he had chosen differently? That question led directly to the creation of the Federal Reserve, an institution designed to act as the nation's central bank, to provide liquidity in crises, and to ensure that the U.S. financial system would never again depend on the will of a single individual. Of course, the Federal Reserve has not eliminated crises, far from it. From the Great Depression to the financial meltdown of 2008, panics have returned in new forms. But the foundation laid after 1907 fundamentally reshaped America's financial architecture. The panic of 1907 reminds us that financial systems are ultimately built on trust, and when that trust breaks, the consequences can be catastrophic. It is a lesson written in the long lines of depositors outside locked bank doors, in the desperate faces of families who lost their savings, and in the smoke-filled library of J.P. Morgan, where the future of the nation hung in the balance.